come to work, live, and so that is why it's important for us to add it. So that was placed in the plan as well. Yeah, and this is just some more market analysis information that talks about, it's the same information that we had before. Like I said, the format is just a little bit different, but about growth and what the anticipated development is as far as housing and land uses, as far as retail and office. And that is looking at that market sector coming from the Metroplex, as people are coming from there and moving here. So visioning. I can't see my screen. Okay. So the visioning chapter, as you know, it talks about the regional relationships, the committee, it goes into public engagement, the themes, and the goals of the chapter. It explains that for individuals. So this is just going into the public input page, how we have the public workshops, the virtual meetings, the website. It's just giving people context. This is where the themes are explained that I talked about earlier, and it also just talks about how each chapter has a goal associated with it that is in line with those themes. And then, of course, you know that chapter also goes into all of the policy statements. It gives a summary of all the policy statements for every chapter. Okay, so this is just resilient city. We've always had this. It's just how does a city bounce back from stressors, whether it's economic, whether it's weather related, whatever it is. That's an important, resiliency is an important part of comprehensive planning. Even some cities go as far as getting resiliency plans done for their city. Okay, land use. Let me go to document 1. So for the land use chapter, as you know, we have that goal to encourage the most desirable and efficient use of land while using economic development and enhancing the physical environment. And so we have themes from the land use and from the economic development arena for that particular chapter. And then the policy statements, as you know, looks into the regional center, quality of life, the use of the developed land, protecting natural areas, housing variety, economic growth, and then also majors field. I don't want to read all of that, it would be kind of long. So this is an important part of it as well. As you know, in this land use chapter, it talks about the different land uses that the future land use plan looks at. And one of the things is that it has those synergy nodes, which is within the future land use map. The synergy nodes is like, for example, for downtown, this designation for downtown defines a walkable pattern of land use, including mixed use, retail, office, urban residential, civic, government, and entertainment. And so these uses create an urban context that creates a synergistic environment of supporting relationships, parking, customers, and residents. And so that is just placed upon our plan in order to just emphasize that these are key areas that when development is improved, when we're looking at making recommendations for the area, we need to keep these synergies in mind. And then the synergy nodes are just the ones that are outside of downtown, which is the same thing. Those land use patterns, including office and retail and commercial, entertainment, that create like an environment that supports relationships as far as parking, mobility, you know, customers, employment, all of those things. And so those areas you'll see as we get to it on the future land use plan are in key intersections within Greenville. Land use directions, you'll see within the plan. I don't remember if this was in the last draft. And what we have is just guidance when we look into this plan of when you're looking at commercial, residential, retail, what are some other recommendations we should consider as we approve those type of developments. And so that is something you can also look at and give us feedback on as So this is the land use plan. It may look a little different because we needed to input it into our GIS system. So that's one thing. And then also we made changes based upon upcoming and future development. And so it may be a little bit hard to see, but we still have the gateways. We have 3 gateways, one at 380. The others are at 30, entering into the city, coming from 30. And then we have those synergy nodes along 30 downtown and near L3 in the airport. And so if you look at this land use plan, it's basically having the commercial along the major corridors and intersections, 30, some parts of Wesley Street and Joe Ramsey. Then we have some neighborhood retail, and we kept some of the agricultural use within the area, and we put a lot of the remaining land within, especially the southeastern and the southwestern, either southern quadrants that are undeveloped as residential, because that's what's coming in. Most of the planned development for the southern part of the city is residential in those areas. Let me see if there's anything else in this land use plan. We removed a lot of industrial land uses that were near downtown or in the northern part of the city, and we concentrated the industrial areas to the western part of the city for future land use. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, and the last thing, you see blue, that's institutional. That includes schools, churches, hospitals, public places. As far as future land use, generally your schools, churches, institutions are your pillars within the community, and so we kept that in mind as we develop this future land use plan as well. All right. So this is the new edition. It just talks about growth. Just gives a snapshot of how growth has occurred. As we know, downtown is the original core of the city, so therefore most of the development that is older is in downtown. Most of the older homes are up in North Greenville, and so you can see visually kind of a timeline spatially of the new and the old in a way. And that's going to be important because that speaks to neighborhood and housing chapter of the plan. And so these are just the key recommended growth areas that we had in the plan before. Nothing has changed here. Within certain segments of the city, I'll go to the plan part of it, there was some recommendations of things to keep in mind as far as growth. And then lastly, in each chapter for the future land use, this is not all of the policies, and you'll see all of them when you receive the link, but at the end of the chapter, we had a table before. Those tables have been moved to implementation. Right now, what we have is just the policy and the action items that's associated with it that we're to follow. In the implementation chapter, we've added those tables there, and those just really talk about whether they're long-term, short-term, ongoing, and then key partnerships and things like that to see it through. We felt like that was a better chapter to put those in. All right, parks and open space. This is a chapter that received a number of changes. And so one of the important goals of this for this was a green network of parks, trails, and open space for both active and passive use, which meets the needs of all age groups and enhance the quality of life. And so some of the themes associated with, as you can see, is parks and open space, transportation and mobility, community character, community health. All of those themes tie into that, and the different policy statements as far as connecting families with trails, the park dedication ordinance that we have now, actually, the market, capital improvement programs, which I'll show you some of the recommendations we have for that, natural systems, the Bi-City Bicycle Network, I'll go over that as well. Farmers market is an important thing, so we have that sprinkled throughout the document, and then community partnerships. So within the plan, we've added an inventory of existing parks. You can get a snapshot of like the developed acreage and undeveloped acreage parks within the city. I know Austin Park is soon to be a developed park, but right now it's not. And we also added a level, taking that into account, the acreage, we added a level of service. So how much parkland do we have, and how much parkland kind of would we like to get to meet, let's see, to meet a 12-acre target. So we're at a large deficit. So we're about 90 acres for developed and 45 developed undeveloped parks. Oh yeah, and if you take into account undeveloped and developed parks, we're at 46.5 acres. And over to your right, it just shows you, basically it shows you in radius, and it really shows you a radius of people who are within walking distance of a park. So you have your half mile and your quarter mile. We just wanted to give a visual reference because that helps inform where parks are needed. So we can see where the holes are, and we know where there's residential development already, but you can also see there's residential developments that don't really have a park nearby. And so we wanted to include this level of service. That was something we really wanted to see, and I think it's a good illustration. Another thing that we added to the parks chapter are recommendations for park enhancements. So you'll see that each park is listed. It'll have the existing amenities for the park, but then also it'll have, for some parks, recommendations and the cost associated with those. And so I don't have a spread of each park, but I think at least half the parks we have recommendations of improvements within.
Do you have recommendations that you already have, or do you want us to give?
We have recommendations that we receive from staff, and it gives us a number of estimated costs, and it's also kind of based upon that survey, and it talks about that. So we had the survey, residents said what they wanted to see, and that's how it was developed. Yeah, but all of this is what you're reviewing this to give us any feedback as you see it as well. So that's why this is the trails check. This is another one we made. We have not seen the Parks Master Plan because there has been a few changes to that Parks Master Plan. So it originally had the Sports Park Trail, which connects the Sports Park to North Greenville. There's a north side trail that kind of connects, it creates a loops and connects it to Grand Park. And we also had the Midtown Trail. So what we added was some floodplain trails. The previous plan incorporated those. We wanted to bring those in, if at all possible, when new development comes. If we can have this plan to point to, we can say, hey, you're putting your development in the place that we are planning for trails. Can you incorporate this within your development? And so we have those floodplain trails, and then we also added a loop trail coming from near here down 15, and then going all the way up to the sports park and connecting into the floodplain trail as well. And so it kind of creates a loop per se. And so
1570 from 34 to 30 and then up to 66. Wanted to have wide sidewalks to accommodate bikes.
Okay.
I think maybe that's what your yellow line is.
Well, the yellow.
But I can't read that. So.
The yellow line, it is to, well, it would go along with that. That would be great if that's going to be, if that's planned for already. It'll make this a reality.
They're taking them out of the drive lanes and taking that footage and putting it into the sidewalk.
Oh, for like a shared use path? Okay. That'd be perfect. this will give us something that we need in Greenville, which are those trail systems along the roadway that provides mobility. If we can get these shared use paths and that form of connectivity is a recreational aspect. But then also, you know, eventually the plan also recommends, if at all possible, we can put signage or sharrows within neighborhoods that'll connect communities as well, if people can kind of ride their bikes on the street where the traffic is not as fast. And so then it'll go into recommendations as far as increasing trail connections, capturing history through parks, you know, downtown park revitalization, just different ways that parks are important and can be captured throughout the city. And then it'll go into the action items, which you'll be able to look at and review when you get the copy. Neighborhood and housing, this is another, all of the chapters are important. Neighborhood and housing, protect the integrity of existing and future neighborhoods through property maintenance, strategic public improvements, and design. And so those key themes, a part of this are housing and neighborhood, infrastructure, community character, resilience, and flexibility. And so some of the policy statements deal with identifying neighborhood priorities, citizens as a valuable resource, public space, investments, diverse housing, and walkable neighborhoods. One of the things that was added is just talks about the housing survey that was conducted, but also the market analysis and who lives here and why that is important to understand when we're looking at the housing market and the types of housing that is being developed here, and also the way that we retain residents as well. It also thought it was important to add the previous study in the other existing, the previous comp plan, because they did a series of recommendations throughout the city. I only showed the northern part of it because the southern part was pretty much undeveloped, and it was just about having development guidance for those areas. But this northern part, you can see it was neighborhood preservation or housing rehabilitation and maintenance, clearance and or redevelopment or development guidance. One of the things that has happened since that plan is a lot of the clearing. A lot of the clearing has occurred, and so right now we're seeing that infill housing happen. And so that is something important to consider as we're looking at this as well. Over to your right, you can see, based on zoning, the housing makeup within the city. And why that's important, it'll go into that. One of the things we did by district, because we received feedback by district, districts are changing, is that we did an updated recommendations by district of what we need to look at and what we need to think about for housing. So it gives you a little details about each area and what's in the area, and the strategic housing priorities that we should look at as far as growth. And is it a place for preservation? Do we need to do housing rehabilitation? Things like that. One of the things that you will see is that if you look at the census data and just who lives and where, I mean, it may be important at some point to have some type of housing program that helps residents with maintenance or repairs, or figure out how we can get those tools to them, because it's needed, especially in the northern part of the city. And so what this plan does talk about is ways to empower residents to revitalize and help the community, because they want it as well. And so it's really just where we have our older homes, which is in, I would say, Joe Ramsey North. And this kind of looks at that and gives some directives if that's something that we could jumpstart and get going. So, and then also it just gives also just different action items as far as how neighborhoods could be developed. And yeah. And all of this, we also look at and consider as we approve the developments, and we know what we're asking for when developers are coming in the door as well. Downtown, this is a key chapter. It's probably one of the longest ones as well. So downtown, they're to provide opportunities for new walkable economic development and enhances downtown Greenville. So being that it's walkable and the economic development is key because we want the density, we want people downtown walking, shopping, enjoying entertainment, things like that. And so you can see the key themes that are associated with downtown has to do with just growth, activities and events, connectivity, that north-south mobility, parking, public space, the synergy, the importance of diverse land uses and activities, history and preservation, that is a tourist attraction, and it's important to capitalize on. Zoning, what type of zoning is needed or possible changes, and then the TERS district, which we already have there.
Latora, how will this be either modified or written or whatever by the downtown vision committee plan that will then go to the council and et cetera, et cetera? How are those going to interact?
So that's a good question. So the comp plan is a broad hierarchy, and what will happen is the consultant, they'll say, hey, where's your comp plan and what are the recommendations? And so it will actually just be an extension of what this is. It won't override it. It should complement it very well, and it should be a more in-depth design strategy that is buildable, whereas this is just more recommendations and action. So it shouldn't override it. It should really complement it.
So what you're saying is there won't be any competing visions as a result of what the Downtown Visioning Committee recommendations come forward?
No, even if that document has its own vision statement, I doubt if it conflicts with what's already here. This is just a bunch of information that we have gotten based upon the input, and I'm pretty sure the input will be exactly the same when you get this document as well. It was the same people, same views, same visioning, and it's really just going to take it another step further. And so it's important to do this one, the downtown plan anyway. And this plan actually recommends a downtown study. So we're moving ahead, and it's great.
So Latora, when you say it's all the same people, is it the same consultant?
No, it's the same community.
Okay.
Everyone who has provided input, even if there's a public survey or whatever, it's everyone's input is going to be the same.
This is a higher bird's eye view. The downtown study that we're working on is more like boots on the ground, like this is the zone we're talking about in this bird's eye.
Yes, design strategies,
So this will inform the vision.
yes, infrastructure.
Will it be the intent to make downtown an overlay district in a comprehensive plan?
No, it has, since it's already its own central business district, we don't have to. If this plan, if this new plan redefines the boundary of that, that'll be something that'll be different. And we may have to go back and look at the comp plan. And so that may be something we want.
So the comp plan could be amended if there's a conflict between the comp plan and the downtown vision plan, if the council adopts it. I mean, because I think they would not want to adopt two things that were conflict.
Correct.
That's one of my concerns is should we, before we go final with all this, should we let the Downtown Visioning Committee do their work and just come forward with one vision?
Or wait a year.
I participated in both. I don't think that it's, I think it's what she's trying to say, which is, this is what everybody's input of, this is kind of what we want downtown to be. The downtown committee is working on within that realm. So we're going to be using that information to try to
This is the
achieve.
strategy, our vision is the action plan.
Well, that was my question. So you expect the downtown vision committee to be basically
Take this,
Yeah.
confined by this and defined by this?
Or fine tune within it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has opportunities within there that could be utilized. I don't think it's confining. I feel like it's broad enough. I feel like it has a lot of strategies and options and opportunities that can be utilized. Anything that's done in addition to that still doesn't compete with it. And so I think the committee should consider what the comprehensive plan is asking for, because it is a plan that encompasses the thoughts and attitudes of what the community wanted. It's not separate from it, so it has to be considered. You know what I'm saying?
And also, what's the gentleman's name we've been working with?
Rick?
Rick. So for those of y'all that have been with me, we kind of discussed downtown, drove around. I did that with Rick and Latora too. So they kind of seen the inside too, Rick, from the inside out.
And then we have.
Because I knew Laura Herrera was newer to Greenville, so I wanted her to kind of understand the lay of the land, like in the 33 square blocks I always talk about, like downtown's really big. There's a lot of things we can do within it that we tend to think about only on Lee Street. It's a lot bigger than that. And so I did that with them as a bonus to try to help them for this.
And that was helpful. And we had a meeting as well with downtown stakeholders. And that we took a lot of notes and we added that information.
When were those meetings?
That was the same.
That was before the vision, that was in June.
Yeah, that was the same day we had our last comprehensive plan. Same exact thing.
That was downtown business owners.
Yeah.
No. Property
You should have come.
He wasn't invited.
Nor
I
was the
wasn't at that one
committee.
either.
The committee,
Doyle.
the committee is, so, all right.
It's in the past.
All right, so another thing that we added was, this was a land use as is at the time that it was taken, and it just looks at all of the different land uses, not zoning, as far as residential, retail, commercial, mixed use, churches, vacant buildings, vacant lots. We just wanted to get a snapshot of what downtown is. And
What is the white up the middle? Is that just two different
oh,
panels?
yeah, that's the spread, yeah. The sheet is divided into a spread, look like this. So it's not a divide, it's just broken into two sheets. And so this page really goes into the different, it separates out, the spread separates out, so yeah, what you're looking at, I may not have told you all, you're looking at spreads side by side, so, of the document. So it just separates out the different land uses and it kind of gives some recommendations, but it also just lets you know what is the largest use as far as public, retail, buildings that were vacant at the time. That may have changed, but you can kind of get a general census of vacancies. One of the things, I mean, for example, with the vacancies, I think that that section just talks about how at the entrances of Greenville, we have those vacancies right when you come in. And so that provides a certain perspective and how can we help, at least if the buildings are vacant, make them look like they're not vacant. How do we change that gateway into downtown? But you can see most of the residential properties, of course, are to the north. We have vacant lane and then existing parking as well. And so then, so this talks about those different scenarios that we had within the city that everyone voted on, and they voted on certain aspects of the scenarios they thought were important. And so we've given just a summary of those, and those are also just attributes and things to consider because a lot of those different scenarios and the different attributes associated with them came from the recommendations that you all gave us about downtown. And this one is just a preferred scenario. That graphic may change, but of downtown, and it just goes into the different parts about road diet, greenery, to it, public parking, intersection improvements, wayfinding signage, things like that. There's my pen. Okay, this goes into more detail about the Lee Street diet that we talked about. If it's possible, maybe one block at a time. Try one block and see how it works. This just gives you a bird's eye view of what that looks and feels like. We also, some beautification opportunities on the corners of Greenville. McKinney was an example that we talked about, and how they have those pots, and how, I think we have a few here, but how we can incorporate those types of things. Just those small improvements.
Laura, these two pages, that page and the one before, those are things that I suspect the Downtown Visual Committee and the consultant are going to get heavily into.
Mm-hmm.
I can't read this, so I don't know how prescriptive these are. So, I mean, I could see that those would be things where,
this is
the downtown vision recommendation may be different than what's in here. So,
right. And these are recommendations. It's pointing you in
These
the
are?
direction. Yeah.
okay.
And so,
And just to be clear, these screenshots are gonna be where we can go on and read them on the computer.
yeah, you're going to get the document itself, and so
Okay.
you'll be able to,
Read it on a
read
screen
it.
and not.
Yeah, not that. No, this is just for the PowerPoint presentation.
So, Latour, I have a follow-up question to that.
Mhm.
So looking here, like it says parking. So I'm assuming that there was research done that we could have access to, like parking. Has there been a parking audit? Do we know how many parking spaces we have across downtown and that sort of thing? And has there been any analysis done about how many parking spaces we have and how many we need?
We have not done it. We do have it. We have parking maps. We don't have an analysis on the needs.
Okay.
Based on demand and land use, or even time of day. Like you don't have that type of analysis.
Okay.
That would be helpful, because that is a question people are saying we need more parking.
I think
People
we
saying
expect the
need parking.
consultant, the downtown consultant,
So that would be something that
to
the
find
executive
out,
would do. Yes.
how
Yes.
many,
Yes.
and that's going to depend on how buildings are used and how they're converted.
And also how comfortable it is to walk from the parking spaces to the buildings, how safe it feels,
Yes, pedestrian comfort.
and wayfinding so that you know where the parking lots are.
Like that at science.
Okay, so that's analysis, that's a study and analysis that still needs to be done then.
Yeah, it's more detailed and more strategic and more scope that we provide. The comp plan provides a guidance, and the hope is that we follow it. And the good thing about it is that we're all forward thinking and it's already starting. So, and so these are some of the action items, and you can take a look at that. And like, if you have any questions about, and there's more. This is just a snapshot of how these could potentially conflict if they seem too prescriptive. That's another thing. If something just seems too prescriptive, let me know. Let me get my pad. Mobility. All right. So this chapter is rather short, but we go into the mobility portion. We look into the transportation plan, and we also just talk about enhanced circulation, pedestrian connectivity. Hopefully the policy statements is we prioritize future pedestrians, develop a trail network, and so it's an overlapping of chapters, as this is the same thing that we account for the parks chapter as well, as far as trail networks. So everything ties in together.
Is that first paragraph about Wesley Street? I think that's what this is. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the next.
Is the next slide? Okay. All right, so So this chapter, we look at Lee. Of course, once again, we brought, we talk about that Lee Street Road diet. This is a very important part that came up in our meetings a couple times. So it's also within the transportation portion of this plan. And then it just goes into, yes, it talks about Wesley Street, pedestrian bicycle facilities, and active transportation network. We also define our street categories as far as the major arterial, minor, what those right-of-ways are, pavement widths, our collector roads, local roads, things like that. Those are defined. They did not change from the previous comprehensive plan. So those widths carried over when we talked with engineering. We left it the way it was. This is our updated thoroughfare plan.
One thing we want to do on those, though, the county just Tuesday adopted the countywide transportation plan, taking into account the city's plans, but they have profiles, 120-foot right-of-ways, 100-foot right-of-ways, 80-foot right-of-ways. We need to make sure that what the city builds and then what the county might build that goes beyond the city limits.
Right.
Have similar profiles.
Did the county plan we work in conjunction with TxDOT on the TxDOT on roads in town and county when they were developing bridge driveways for the county?
Well, the profiles, though, Al, a lot of that is for development out in the county in the future, but you've got some places within the city, you know, going out to 1570, for instance, where you're probably going to have a major arterial. And so, you know, and then it may go on across 1570, and you may want those to be compatible. But the county plan was really, as much as anything, just so that the county has some measure of control over developments and can cause right-of-way to be dedicated sufficient to handle all the increased traffic. Where right now they can't, they were not able to do that until Tuesday.
Is that plan on the site? Has it been uploaded to Hunt County site or anything?
They were making a few little tweaks, I think as late as today, and they sent it to Judge Stovall's office. I don't know if Jessica's uploaded it yet or not, but actually, when I get home, if I don't forget, I'll forward you the link to it.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Our thoroughfare plan, there were a few changes due to the impact fee analysis. And so one of the things about the impact fees is that they are projects that are accounted for. And so when a fee is collected from a developer to basically fund the increased capacity of that development coming, it goes to either streets, water, wastewater. And so we needed to make sure that our alignments, one, were the same, and two, that we had all of the same streets accounted for. So we added, I think, a few segments were modified and updated for the comprehensive plan so that our thoroughfare plan matched the impact fee. And so that's where a lot of the recommendations for improvements is housed.
Summer, do you know, is this the same one that was submitted, that you submitted to Freeze and Nichols?
Yes, because I sent it to her, yes. That's
Oh,
the
okay.
time. Yes.
Okay. We were just trying to make sure that.
Yes. No
Roy
changes.
City, Quinlan, and Greenville are the only ones that have transportation plans. So.
Okay, right. No changes were done since it was
Since it was-
August. Was it August or September? And so these are some of the policy directives as far as mobility concerned. And there are a few more spreads in the mobility chapter. Infrastructure. So basically this is pretty broad, and it talks about monitoring, maintenance, of the infrastructure, prioritization, targeted capital improvements. Like I said, a lot of the identified infrastructure improvements are laid out within the impact fee plan that will be adopted. And so that'll be available online, really in tandem at the same time, or either before or after, depending on when this plan is approved, but around the same time. You should have the impact fee. So you have a whole separate document that addresses infrastructure. And so we just give a kind of the history and a brief context of wastewater system and the water capacities in Greenville. And then some key action items to think of going forward as we consider infrastructure and growth within the city. Okay, so this is the last chapter before implementation. This is public safety and facilities. I need to mix this one. So, yeah, we're looking at efficient facility use, planning and design, level of service, technology, renovations, coordination. Those are different things to consider when we think about the public safety and the facilities in their building, especially as growth happens. Yeah, so there's police. We have information on the police department. Fire provide us with a good bit of information as well. This is just looking at the fire station and their coverage. Let's see. And then the GISD in their current locations and where they are. And this really just, honestly, this just gives context and a snapshot to those looking at Greenville so they can understand what we have and what's located within the city as far as existing facilities are concerned. The library also provides us with some extensive information so people can understand what's there and what's available, and also what they're needing and recommendations as far as they look forward and as growth occurs. Right now, the library is currently adequate for the population that we have. Even with growth, it is still adequate as far as the square footage is concerned. It's just a list of the facilities and also action items. There's another spread of that for the public facilities that you'll be able to read. What time is it? Oh, 6:55. Okay. And so like I said, this implementation just talks about methods for implementation, how we have to be proactive instead of reactive. The document won't sit on a shelf. We'll utilize it, we'll look at it, we'll see where we're checking the boxes, and then and we'll use this table as a guide. And so what these tables are the same action items you saw at the end of each chapter, along with the type, the time frame, which department is responsible for it, and then key partnerships to see it through to implementation. And so that entire implementation chapter has that. And then following this particular chapter, these aren't all of them, following that, then we go into the appendix that houses like our survey responses, the meeting boards, things like that, a lot of the survey data, and definitions as well, to certain terminology utilized in the plan. But that is the overview. I didn't take the whole hour, but I'm opening up any additional questions.
I guess the main question would be, once after we get the link and get to actually look at it, because I see you said if I was condensing pages, that's something that you guys can kind of figure out which ones you want to do.
They're already been condensed, so it's
Gotcha.
already done, yes. So it's now at 260. It was hidden close to 300, and it's trying to just more efficiently lay it out.
I guess I did have another one. What, I know before, because of COVID and everything, stuff got kind of, a lot of things got slowed down and pushed back. But now, what do you think as far as being done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I want you to have a chance to review the plan. And if there's key elements that are missing, and we have, like you said, something that's super descriptive, if there's something you see missing, whatever, you need those comments. Depending on how many there are, that'll affect the timeline. If they're very minor, we may meet one more time to say, hey, this is the final draft, and we're gonna take it to P&Z. P&Z would then go through the review process, and then it'll go to council. So we may have one more meeting after this if we don't have many comments. We'll see. We probably should.
Latora, when are comments due?
So I was thinking we need to, is 3 weeks a long enough time to get, 3 weeks would be a long time. Because if we can do them in 3 weeks, that'll give time to assess it, and that puts us on track to think about the next meeting and also what I can get on the P&Z schedule.
So last time, people couldn't see other people's comments, and not everybody did it through the Dropbox or whatever it was. How will that be addressed?
As far as seeing each other's comments, well, what we can do is, because not everybody utilizes Dropbox like that. So if you want to share your comments, you can send them to me, and I can send the comments out to everyone else. I can be the one to collect the comments, and then we can I can disseminate them to everyone.
Do it by email with attachments.
How would that work time-wise? If I submitted a bunch of comments, would you put it back out to the group the next day?
No, if we got 3 weeks, 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, I'll look at them and I can send them out.
And that defeats me being able to see other people's comments while I'm reviewing. Sometimes somebody else's comment gives me, and I'm reading it.
Give everybody your email and they'll just send it to you too.
What if you sent them out once a week?
Yeah.
And then that way everyone would, you could, it might, it would at least be sort of a halfway in between the 3 weeks. Once a week would give people a chance to, for the comments to come in and be collected. And then you would have some time for everyone to be able to see them and respond.
Say a little bit more work for you.
And how many people were you expecting to kind of review and provide comments? Because there's, just a handful of people here. Are they going to be sent out to certain groups, or are you going to put out a public call, or how's that going to work?
It's sent out to the committee, the same, so we have approximately 20-ish committee members, and so I'm looking for them to kind of send me the comments and then review them and then go from there.
So would it be beneficial to send it out to the downtown vision committee too?
No, it's the timelines. Not that work.
Okay. I was hoping that you guys co-chairs, aren't you, on that committee, right?
Yeah, Randy Darby.
Okay.
But, we don't have a consultant yet. So.
Oh, okay.
I think, we get this done, depending on how it fits in with what's going on with this.
So we're talking about comments, but really we're just more, instead of comments, instead of using that word, we're really overviewing the whole thing and adding input of missing things possibly, correct?
Right.
We don't need to get crazy on this.
No.
Based on that, can we kind
This should be minimal.
Can we also get an executive summary type thing of what additions have been made so we can go specifically look for them? Because it has been 6 months or so.
Yeah, I pretty much have a
bullet
record
point,
of most
what
of
we've added, what we've taken out.
Yes,
So we
since the
can
last time we met?
Yeah.
Yeah, I already have like a doc.
Yeah, if you could send that out to the
Yeah, I
committee,
can
that'd
send
be
that.
helpful when we do our review to what changes have been made.
Yeah. I can send that.
And if we have some questions, like I already have something I would like to make sure is in here, I just thought I don't want to put it in there, but if I have questions about zoning or something, should I call you or Rick or?
Yeah, just,
Instead of you, Rick?
No, I think it's a good idea to send it to the visioning committee, even if we don't have a consultant right now, because there's a lot of good research here that might help the visioning committee think about the different aspects and different perspectives to consider.
And if they haven't, it may be good to do it once we get the comments back, and then share with them, because within a time frame, it'll still be a good time for them to see it before the plan jumps off.
I have a question. You mentioned the community parks have been unused, they've not been used as we need to use them. And I'm just wondering, I guess I need to just send you an email or something, because with the development of areas in North and West Greenville, as one ride through there, you see a lot of houses, but there's no places for the children to play, because they're playing in the streets because there's no park area. And then if you go further west, you see like a whole new development coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been underutilized, and I'm just wondering, is there any plans, or is that something I can send to you and make a suggestion?
So for North Greenville,
And west.
and West, we have, I know we have Austin Park in here, and
But
we
I'm
have
thinking about more the, well, it's close to the 69 area.
69.
9 area where they're doing a lot of development.
Well, okay, so the way that works is, in order for the way that the city or the Parks Department acquires new land is through the Parkland Ordinance.
Mhm.
And so that is through new developments. And so they either pay in lieu of if we feel like, as far as level of service, if the Parks Department feels as though they need a new park in that area. If it's the northern part of Greenville, but you're saying towards
The more
69.
west,
Because now southwest and southeast, those are areas where we begin to pick up parks, because that's where new development is occurring, and that's where we don't have a lot of parks. The older parks that we currently have are being, and we have some recommendations for enhancements and cost estimates for it. But exactly where you're talking about,
close to 380 and 69.
380 and 69, we only have Carver Park, and that's probably the
And
closest park there.
there's a lot of housing development for those who dare to travel that direction. So you may want, that's something to consider, because
Okay.
Do we not require a certain amount of green space for development?
Yes, there is, but it would, one of the things we're looking at as far as the zoning ordinance is kind of modifying required green space for developments, but the ordinance kind of takes care of that anyway. It puts monies aside for a park if there's not a park there in the area, in the service area of that development. So, but just to answer your question, it's not, we don't have a recommendation where if a subdivision is built, they have to set aside this much area for park. That's not in the ordinance.
New developments that are coming in have to either give an X number dollar amount per home that's built, or a certain amount of space per home, and then that money, if it's the money, then that money is used to then develop the existing and new charters.
Within the service area.
Right, but most of them try to come, they will come right in under it, because of course they want to put more houses, as many houses on that plot of land as possible. And just to be truthful, depending on the price range of the homes,
I think
yeah.
that's what have a
My
lot to do.
concern is, as I ride through there, I see the children playing in the street, and that Wallen, I'm trying to think of the name of the streets over there, and that area, and it would be nice to see them playing basketball in a little area, somewhere still in the middle of the street.
Yeah, I know
Not
that.
high traffic, but.
Right over off of Fred, going on the
Yes.
other side of 69. Yeah, I know
Yes,
exactly.
They're building new houses out there.
Yeah, but there's no
Yeah,
park.
but there's no park. The
The
kids
main
play
thing
in
you
the
gotta
street.
do is you have to acquire land. And this infill housing is
Doesn't-
not done, it's not blocks of housing where you could say, well, you've got to set aside an acre or whatever, 2 acres or whatever. But one of the places, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not really an outside park Reese Davis, is it?
No.
No.
It's a-
But the city's got a good bit of land there. Unless there's, is there a park at Carver Elementary?
It's a lot of green
There's a
space.
playground at Carver Elementary, but
Okay.
it's owned by the school district. I mean, it's fenced, so you can't just go and play on it.
So the city and the school district don't have a joint park
Well,
agreement anymore?
Like Reese Davis, the Boys and Girls Club operates out of Reese Davis. The Boys and Girls Club can use that, like they have an agreement, but as far as like just being an open neighborhood park, I don't believe it's open.
What happened to, I don't know, but what happened to the park that's behind LP Waters? There used to be a baseball park. What happened to that?
Ooh, someone told me recently. I think
There
it
was
was
always
always
school,
school.
the school, and so the school was at, the city gave it back to the school. So it belongs to the school.
I don't think that one had a playground, did it? I thought it was just baseball field.
It was a baseball
There's a
field.
playground, there's a playground that's part of the school
Oh, okay.
that sits between the
So
baseball.
I have an overall question about planning and zoning, and we're talking about future plans here, so like, these are things that could come into play, we gotta think visionary ahead of time, but there's been quite a bit of development, you talk about north central Texas, you've got 7 million people, and you've got all these little tiny cities that never had downtowns that are building stuff that mimic that. Most recently, I've been to Highland Village, but also Waters Creek and Allen, if you've ever been there, how they've developed that plan in there that's kind of mimics an old downtown. It's got a central parking area, and then they have music. So when they have a band playing, it's for all the restaurants that surround that. It's not one band for one restaurant, it's one band for 17 restaurants or whatever they have in there. But the question is, if somebody comes to Greenville, and we tend to be approving right now of residential zoning as it's done now, like, I want to eat over here, so that's got to be commercial, and I want to live over here, so that has to be a neighborhood. But is there a mixed use zoning that somebody could use if somebody wants to come in and build one of those type developments, if they remain popular and profitable? Is that on this plan that you know of?
We recommend it, and one of the things is the next thing to do is to amend the zoning ordinance and add zoning districts that we currently have.
So it has to be done individually by project, but based on this plan now.
Yeah, well, based upon the way our current zoning ordinance is, it have to be like a PD, plan development. But the way that, because this is not our zoning ordinance, this is just recommendations, then our zoning ordinance is the law. So we would have to go in and amend it and add a zoning district, mixed use, things like that.
So they would have to have enough land for all that, first of all, somewhere, and then they would have to work.
Well, the closest example would be Steinbeck's land, because that's got apartments and maybe a baseball
Yeah,
park.
that's not been built yet. Yeah, but
Well, no,
yes,
but it's that sort of, it's that sort of acreage that you've got to have, I think, to do what you're talking about.
That's only multi-family.
Because having been involved with building a brand new house to live in and having been involved with remodeling one or a building, they are two different animals. But so is trying to remodel a 100-year-old downtown and building a new one. It's like total night and day. So much more work for the downtown, I can tell you, because we've been working on this for a long time. But if we get the luxury of somebody wanting to build a development like that, I just wanted to make sure that they don't have any, that we don't build any walls for them, so to speak.
And so back to the green space, understand what you're saying, but if green space isn't set up inside of those developments, then you have park. You don't have any continuity or any travel, and that, in a way, breaks your plan, your mobility plan. So is that something that will be addressed?
Yes, in the zoning ordinance change, we've been talking about all of these types of changes. That's the only way to ensure that development does is that we have to update it.
Now, what is the plan on the zoning ordinance? As far as, are you waiting until this is done before the zoning is tackled?
Yeah, it's kind of,
And have to, don't you?
Yeah, you gotta, once this is approved, and we can go into the zoning ordinance and focus on those changes based upon recommendations within the.
Are you talking about connectivity of neighborhoods, so that if you have multiple
That would be
developments,
trails plan, wouldn't it?
that, yeah, and that's what you gotta make sure that the,
And you'd have to
particularly the
incorporate
collector
that
roads have, you know, have either bike lanes.
Because green space by definition is something that's not built on. And it's mostly in a lot of areas, the unusable space by a developer, they count it as green space, let's be honest.
Yeah, it depends on how it's defined, especially for multifamily developments. You know, you could say that it can't include parking lot islands, it can't include areas in between sidewalks, but it has to be usable open space. There's a way to define it to make sure that it's what we want to do.
That's what I see in all the developments that we're missing.
You mean like just having the connectivity so that if you're in this neighborhood, you can get over to a park in that neighborhood? Or are you talking about like each development having a neighborhood park within?
Either or, two developments that put one in between. I think that we have to have language in there that allows that to happen versus, I'm gonna go build and I'm gonna throw you some money for a park and I'm using every inch I have of houses 5 feet apart.
I don't know if they can do that, because the ordinance defines whether they can, if they have to build a park or if they
Yeah,
can.
like it's not a choice. I don't remember what the criteria are. I have to go back and reread it, but it's like they
So
are
we
told
need-
whether or not they give the money or they give the space.
Is it a park or is it a playground that they're required to do?
It's green space.
It's just space.
They're not even-
They're not required to do anything.
In the and I apologize for being late, when you were talking about the trails, is there a plan to connect all of the parks with the trail?
Yes, and that's sort of the goal of the network that we're proposing. But it would be great if we could, whether it's a shared use path off street,
Right.
just connecting trails, schools, neighborhoods, things like that.
Well, actually, there's been a plan in place since 2011 or sometime, I think. No, this was, I don't know, I was asked to come to a meeting to talk about bikes, and bike lanes and bike stuff and you know, Parks and Rec presented a plan. I didn't know it existed. And
Is
it's
some of
pretty,
that incorporated in the Parks Master Plan?
it's pretty, yeah, it's pretty extensive and it goes, you know, from south to north and
Tell you what,
You know.
the trails are what makes a town, man. I mean,
And
every great town has great trail system.
yeah, and I agree with that. And green space, I know, you know, is it a park, is it this? The detention ponds in the divisions, there's not a kid alive except maybe the video generation that won't play on that. A green space doesn't have to be a park. It doesn't have to have a playground. It has to be a big enough space that some kids could throw a ball game together, although they probably don't do that anymore.
I can tell you up in Tulsa, their whole stormwater master plan, all their detention areas are soccer fields. And they use them for practice fields and everything else, unless they're full of water.
Yeah, but if we had something that basically allowed that functionality, I think if you went to a developer and said, okay, here's your choices, but here's some guidelines that we have of how we want our community to look and how to affect that change.
Well, but most of the developers aren't gonna wanna spend money on structures, because then who's gonna maintain it?
Right.
If they put a playground in,
That's why I'm
if there's
saying
not
no
an HOA,
playgrounds.
which a lot of them don't have HOAs, then who's going to maintain that equipment? Is it now the city's responsibility?
I understand, but I'm not advocating for playgrounds.
Well, I mean, I'm just using that as an example, but pretty much anything other than just a big empty field, developers are gonna push back on it, because it's more money, and then the problem of who maintains it, even if it's just park benches.
And more communities,
Well,
don't have boards HOA maintained.
That's the mother detention ponds now. And I don't think there's a problem with telling developers, you know, here's some things that have to happen. I think we fall prey too much to, we gotta get all this development in here and we gotta let them do it their way. Whereas we could guide that and have a little bit more say-so in our community, because once that land's gone, it's gone. Once there's a house on there, we're done.
I think as we update the zoning ordinance, those are the types of strategies we're thinking about. How do we incentivize developments to make the entryways good, have nice walls and facades and things like that. So fencing in parks. So we have the trees in the subdivision. Maybe the houses do have trees, some choose not to have trees. So we have to require certain things in order for that to happen.
So the suggestion versus incentivization versus requirement, that's all being considered for the new zoning ordinances?
Yeah, the zoning
Require
ordinance,
the
the
developers
requirement,
versus
not that it's so much that
Victoria?
it deters, but it's enough.
We have people that are streaming and watching, and we have some questions. One of the questions by Mr. Reginald Washington Sr., he said, kids need something to do, Carver baseball field is empty.
Yeah, it is empty, and let me go to the plan. But yeah,
When my kids were little, all the schools had basketball, covered basketball. The schools had locked them all up, and they store furniture in some of them. And I've never understood that. Well, we need to figure out a way around some of that, because those were used. My kids went to Carver. I lived right across the street from Houston. They were used, I bet, 18 hours a day.
If your kid goes on the playground and gets hurt, they're not listening to this.
Well,
It's unfortunate, but it's a changing times.
Yeah, I was on the school board when we built all those outdoor play spaces at every elementary school, and the whole idea was that, you know, they'd be open, and they'd be lighted. And then, you know, people began to pull up there at 2 o'clock in the morning and have crazy parties, and whatever, and then I think the school district eventually fenced them or
they did.
had to do something.
The shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Parks Department is strategically looking at places to add additional parks. So that's the whole point of the ordinance that was recently passed. So to get there, it'll take some time.
So 3 weeks,
3 weeks.
and you're gonna upload the link?
I will upload the link. It should be tomorrow.
Are you going to send an email with the link?
Yes, I'm going to send an email with the link and a list of kind of the changes that I was able to track that were made. I made a good list of them, so you should be able to look out for those.
You want comments just in PDF comments or email or what?
Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
whatever's easier. Yeah, whatever's easier, just put the pen in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Lots of work. Thank you.
Big hand for Latoya.
Council, I guess.
That was very disappointing.
Thank you. I'm not sure what the lot
Well, you could have my place.
Probably. Yes. Had such shoulder issues. I know that I can do something. Yes, I've catered, I've worked the kitchen, I've, whatever. I can do something. She is such a great friend. Okay, I got it. I've done that. Yeah, it is. I was in the other day and she had said, I can't remember what it was.